What if we were not the first to ask questions of the stars? What if Earth held errors when minds older than ours looked outward, dreamed across oceans, marked cycles in stone? We live surrounded by hints too faint to prove, but too persistent to ignore. Every cliff face, every canyon, every folded seam of mountain holds pages of a book written in pressure and silence, and when we look closely, when we learn to listen, we discover that this book was written long before us. Geology tells us that the Earth is ancient. 4.5 billion years of fire and water, upheavals and calm. In that span, entire oceans have been born and erased. Continents have met and split like drifting memories. In that span, species rose, flourished, and fell into silence again. When seen in such a scale, it becomes humbling to think that our own history, so fragile and bright, is nothing more than a passing chapter, a brief flicker in the endless span of time. But what if, hidden behind that curtain of deep time, others once existed, beings who asked questions as we do, whose tools and thoughts are now dissolved into dust? Fossils remind us of lives we recognize, and those we do not. Trilobites, ammonites, towering reptiles, shadows of worlds we cannot touch. Yet fossils are rare beyond imagining. For every creature that walked this earth, the chances of survival into stone are infinitesimal. Entire ages have been erased without a trace, swallowed in subduction zones or ground into unseen particles by glaciers. So why should we believe that memory, thought, or even civilizations could not also be erased in this way? Could it be that we are not unique, but merely the last survivors of an unbroken chain of remembering and forgetting? Deep time teaches us another lesson. The Earth is not static. It buries and exhumes. It preserves and obliterates. Entire mountains vanish into the sea, while seabeds are lifted sky-high to form new peaks. If traces once existed, tools, structures, languages, they may rest far beneath our feet, carried downward toward the molten silence of the mantle. We may never know them except as anomalies, as quiet disruptions in the geologic record. And still, the thought will not let us rest. What if, long before human hands, the Earth was already a cradle for thought? What if imagination has risen many times, only to fall each time back into silence? Perhaps we are not standing at the beginning of consciousness, but deep into its repetition. If so, then what remains? Perhaps not foundations or ruins, but subtler imprints, isotopic trails too strange to fit our record, odd mineral alignments, patterns in stone that feel like messages beyond biology. Memory not as an archive, but as a faint vibration that lingers long after the song has ended. And if the Earth can forget so completely, what about us? What parts of us will it carry forward, and what will dissolve before the next cycle arrives? Could it be that we are already vanishing, even as we live? And yet some things whisper through silence. If even a fragment of past memory remained, if even one sign has survived the erasures of time, then we might still be able to listen, even now. And so we begin, surrounded not only by what is here, but by what might once have been. For if we were not the first, then everything changes. Our beginnings are no longer an origin story, but a continuation. Our story is not the start of history, but a single moment inside something far older. And yet, if the Earth is a library of forgotten stories, how do we learn to read its hidden pages? Everywhere we look, the Earth carries records, rock strata pressed like thin sheets of paper, each one containing names, climates, deaths, volcanic pulses captured in ash, ocean sediments folded into limestone, peat pressed into coal. This is a library without shelves, a library that never closes, and yet most of its volumes remain unopened. They are unreadable, not because they are not there, but because their words have been blurred by erosion, weather, entropy. And still, we sense they hold more than we know. Scientists read these pages with isotopes and microscopes, with the trained care of chroniclers in the dim light of a forgotten archive. They can tell when oxygen thinned from the air, when a fiery extinction turned ecosystems to ash, when seas once bubbled with organisms now erased from surface life. Carbon layers testify to forests that no longer grow. Trace elements in shells echo temperature swings of climates long past. Each reading is a translation, a phrase from an ancient text. And yet, what if the record is not complete? What if entire paragraphs, entire chapters have been ripped out, consumed in the erasures of moving continents and shifting oceans? Glacial scouring, volcanic swallowing, the ceaseless churn of tectonics, each one destroys as much as it preserves. Imagine a book where only 1 in every 1,000 words survived, and then imagine what kind of story we would think we see. The Earth's library is vast, but it is also fragmented. From this fragmented reading, we build narratives of evolution, of extinction. We see life's slow unfurling, its crashes and restarts. But could this story conceal other kinds of lives? Lives that were not purely biological, but civilizations, structures, minds? What if their pages were erased so cleanly that we see only void where there once was memory? Entropy disguises the difference between what never was and what has been obliterated. An absence may be emptiness, or it may be the most complete kind of forgetting. Could this be why we feel a pull when we step on ancient ground? Not because we sense what is there, but because we faintly feel what is missing. The Library of Earth teaches us humility, to see our own history not as permanent but as fragile. We may write, carve, build, but in the scale of 1 billion years, all of it can vanish like footprints in a tide. Perhaps even now our chapters are already being erased, our shelf marked for silence. And if our record can vanish, then perhaps others have already been lost before us. Which leads us to another question. In these layers of silence, what have we overlooked? For sometimes it is not the preserved bones, but the unexplained gaps that speak the loudest. The rock record is a story of presence, but also of absence. Between thick strata of sandstone, shale, and limestone are gaps, subtle unconformities where thousands, even millions of years simply vanish. Entire epochs lost in a pause, erased without explanation. Scientists call these missing layers hiatuses, intervals where history has slipped away, and yet if the pages are missing, what was once written upon them? We see patterns of extinction, bursts of diversification, long, steady spans of stability. They are stitched together by missing time, like a quilt with more holes than fabric. Imagine a civilization rising during one of these gaps, existing for hundreds of thousands of years, and then disappearing so completely that its layer collapsed into nothing. Would we ever know it was there? Or would we, as we do now, simply build explanations shaped around silence? Silence in geology is not an empty thing. It is an active erasure. Oceans consume the land through subduction, dragging surface history downward into magma. Ice grinds valleys into flat emptiness, removing both graves and monuments. Wind polishes stone until nothing remains but dust. All of these forces are archivists of forgetting. If there were echoes of earlier minds, their voices might resonate for a while in stone, only to be drowned in this perpetual cycle of destruction. The stratigraphic record is not continuous. It is broken, and through its fractures comes the unsettling possibility that we stand upon worlds we cannot see. Even the isotopic records are blurred. Carbon ratios, oxygen signals, altered by heat, pressure alteration, until data itself forgets what it once carried. And yet, in the silence, there is suggestion. The anomalies, the faint interruptions, the unexplained chemical traces, could these be the remaining syllables of erased histories? What fascinates us most is this question. Absence itself may be evidence. Perhaps the very gaps, the discontinuities, are signs of events more profound than extinction alone. Events where memory was not merely lost, but actively deleted by the planet itself. And if absence is a kind of presence, then silence is an echo we cannot yet interpret. What sings through the layers is not only what exists, but what fails to exist. An interval without fossils may be more telling than a slab full of bones. A silence that lengthened across an age may veil a story greater than the bones beside it. Perhaps this is the secret we overlook, that the missing chapters speak most loudly of all. If so, then we are still only at the threshold of Earth's deeper story. And yet, if whole chapters can vanish from the record so completely, what else might we have forgotten? Not all memory is written in books. Some of it lingers in stone, fossils, silent shapes pressed into the sediment like whispered dreams we were never meant to overhear. They tell us stories of creatures we recognize. Shells buried in shale, the curl of an ammonite, the darkened imprint of a fern. But then there are the stranger stories, the ones that hint at absences, at forms too complex or too abrupt to be explained away so easily. When we hold a fossil in our hand, we hold not just the remnant of a body, but the echo of an entire world lost to time, a world that may not have been only animal, a world that may have experimented with memory, with expression, with something that almost begins to resemble thought. Deep time entombs everything equally, the delicate bones of insects and the titanic skeletons of reptiles, the gentle fronds of plants, and perhaps the remnants of more mysterious works. Fossils, we believe, are shards of biology. Yet, could the line between biology and technology be more porous than we've allowed ourselves to see? A tooth can preserve as long as a nail. A wooden spear can mineralize into stone as surely as driftwood can. Clay tablets could vanish as completely as trilobites if pressure and heat had their way. And so we ask, what else could fossilize? Besides bone and leaf and shell, could algorithms of another time have been written not on parchment, not on tablets, but woven into alloys now mistaken for oddly crystalline ores? Fossilization is rare, astonishingly rare. For each skeleton or artifact that survives, countless others return to dust without leaving a trace. This selective memory of the planet is shaped, not by design, but by chance. Rain dissolves, microbes consume, oceans subduct entire histories down into molten silences. What survives is not necessarily what was most common, nor what mattered most. What survives is what managed to escape the erasures of entropy. And so when we look at the fossil record and see neat patterns of emergence and extinction, perhaps it is not a full account we hold before us, but a heavily redacted diary of Earth. Entire languages, entire species, perhaps entire civilizations could have been edited out, page torn after page, leaving behind only fragments that cannot be pieced together. Standing inside a museum, staring at bones assembled into recognizable forms, we forget how improbable their survival was. Yet beyond the neat displays scattered across wilderness and seabed, there are anomalies. Patterns in stone resembling gearwork, metallic nodules locked in coal seams, strange circular imprints, whose symmetry feels deliberate. Most we explain away as mineral accident, and perhaps they are, but what if they are not? What if the fossil record is not complete, but coded, its key somewhere in the shapes we dismiss as coincidence? A fossil, after all, is more than an imprint. It is time itself compressed, time that has been persuaded to pause. Every fossil carries within it isotopic signatures, traces of the world it once belonged to. Oxygen ratios that reveal the warmth of its climate, carbon isotopes that whisper of ancient forests, strontium and uranium that tell us of seas, of rivers, of volcanic fire. What if among these ratios and traces there lies evidence not of geology, but of intention? What if the isotopic fingerprint of an artifact long buried were already in our hands, waiting for us to ask the right question? We often remind ourselves, absence is not evidence, but absence can also be a silence too deep to ignore. If this much survived, if shells and leaves and even the delicate scales of ancient fish remain, then how many other things must have been carried away, erased before the chance of memory, even had a chance to harden into stone? How many entire worlds left behind no single relic to suggest that they had once existed? And maybe that is the true mystery of the fossil record, not what it contains, but what it omits. For every ammonite we can draw with precision, there may have been 1,000 other experiments of life, mind, or something between, forever erased. For every petrified tree trunk, there might have been a structure, a tool, an invention, carried off in the tides of entropy, returned to silence before the strata could claim it. So we stand here tonight, holding in our imagination fossils of what might have been, fossils of possibility, shadows of memory too delicate to remain, and yet if this much can be lost, what else might we have forgotten? And yet, if this much can be lost, what else might we have forgotten? For loss is not an accident of earth, but its guiding law, entropy. The quiet sculptor moves in shadows, rearranging everything we have ever known. It does not strike in sudden violence alone, though sometimes it does. More often it creeps gently, slowly, folding time against itself, smoothing sharp edges, softening memories until all that remains is a hush. Scientists describe entropy as the tendency toward disorder. Energy disperses, structures collapse, order becomes scattered until all systems settle into stillness. But in the wilderness of rocks and oceans, entropy feels less like chaos and more like erasure, like a hand dragging across sand, leaving a smoothness where intricate patterns once lived. Perhaps this is why the fossil record is so selective. Entropy decides not only what survives, but also, more importantly, what vanishes. Whole landscapes have been dissolved beneath entropy's care. Bone breaks down, wood crumbles, pigment fades. Rain infiltrates the smallest fissure, bringing dissolution grain by grain. Even metals and stone cannot resist. Gold tarnishes, copper erodes, granite fractures until even mountains kneel. What remains, what endures, is not what was strongest, but what entropy forgot to erase. And yet, could it be that this law is not simply destructive, but curatorial? Entropy sculpts the story of our planet by erasing most of what came before. It prunes memory, leaving fragments delicate enough to spark curiosity, but sparse enough that certainty is never possible. We do not inherit a complete account of Earth's past. We inherit silence punctuated by ruins, not because the ruins are the fullest truth, but because they are what entropy allowed to survive. Think of ocean subduction, a vast erasure written into the planet itself. Entire continents are dragged downward into molten fire, carrying with them forests, rivers, and possibly even cities we will never know. Once subducted, there is no archive, no remnant, only magma recycling stone into new crust. The earliest history of Earth may be forever unreadable, not because it never existed, but because it has been melted and remade countless times. Entropy is also time's instrument. Radioactive isotopes decay with perfect regularity, like soft ticking clocks buried in rock, yet even they will not last forever. Uranium breaks into lead, carbon returns to nitrogen, signatures blur until the language of isotopes is unreadable. Even our most trusted chronologies dissolve, leaving behind blankness where stories once lay. What if entropy itself is the grand editor of civilizations? Every culture, no matter how brilliant, leaves behind tokens, tools, walls, words. But entropy dismantles them piece by piece. Paper burns, fabric rots, language loses meaning as tongues fall silent. Perhaps the only things left after countless cycles are coincidences, polished bones, half-buried artifacts mistaken for minerals, just enough to suggest possibility, but never enough to tell the whole tale. This raises a question we are rarely brave enough to face. How do we distinguish between what never was and what entropy has erased so completely that nothing remains? Is silence evidence of absence, or evidence of the deepest forgetting of all? When we see empty layers in the record, gaps in the strata, missing pages in the Earth's book, how do we know if nothing happened, or if entropy erased something extraordinary? Maybe this is why we sometimes feel unease, gazing across vast plains of stone or down into forgotten caves. Some part of us senses that what we see is only an afterimage, a faint residue on walls where entire stories once thrived, not because the Earth lies to us, but because entropy has made memory soft, unfinished, incomplete. And still, within absence, there is beauty. Entropy reminds us that permanence is an illusion, that memory is a gift that life must fight to hold even briefly. Perhaps it even offers a kind of mercy, for what is gone does not weigh upon the living. What is forgotten cannot bind us with grief. Yet in the hush of erasure lies a question that will not leave us. If entropy can erase so much, if silence holds more than presence, what wonders might be lost that we cannot even imagine? And if the world around us is already so transformed by forgetting, what deeper archives lie buried in the seas themselves, beneath tides that never rest? What deeper archives lie buried in the seas themselves, beneath tides that never rest? The oceans are the quiet keepers of Earth's oldest secrets. 3/4 of our world rests beneath waves, yet most of it remains unseen, unreachable, covered in darkness so complete it swallows even memory. It is said we know the surface of the moon more intimately than the depth of our own abyss. But perhaps that is fitting, for if the earth has locked away its most secret histories, it has hidden them in water, where pressure and silence guard the past more firmly than stone. Layers of sediment drift down endlessly, year after year, as though time itself were falling like snow. Dust from deserts, the skeletons of microscopic plankton, volcanic ash carried by winds, each fragment settles gently upon the abyssal plains and remains. Millimeter by millimeter, an unbroken record accumulates in the darkness, writing a memory book finer and more fragile than parchment. Here, past climates still whisper in calcium shells, their isotopes carrying the echoes of ocean warmth, of changing atmospheres, of forgotten migrations. Each layer is an archive of what has lived and died, but also what has disappeared beyond anyone remembering. And yet, as with all archives on Earth, this one too is fragile, for the ocean floor is never static. At the mid-ocean ridges, new crust is born, spreading slowly outward. At the trenches, some of the oldest crust sinks again, pulled downward in tectonic subduction, carrying entire archives into the molten interior of the planet. Whatever lies there, creatures, forests, perhaps structures if they ever existed, vanishes utterly, melted back into the fire, memory rewritten as raw stone. What we imagine might be preserved forever in the deep is at best written on a slate that erases itself with every cycle. And still we wonder what lost worlds might have been buried under those seas. The rising and falling of ocean levels across ages has drowned entire landscapes. There were once coastlines hundreds of kilometers farther seaward than today, rich and alive, home to creatures great and small, and perhaps to fires burning in hearths whose ashes are long gone. When ice sheets formed, the waters fell, exposing whole continents of shallow plains that are now only whispers in the drowned seabed. Lands once bustling with life are now hidden in shadow, as if Earth chose to fold them away. Geologists sometimes find tantalizing clues in marine sediments, traces of freshwater plants buried deep beneath the ocean, grains of pollen out of place, carbon layers suggesting burning long before known human fire. Each anomaly is like a faint footprint washed almost clean by the tide. Maybe chance alone, maybe coincidence, or maybe the silhouette of something erased. Could it be that whole cultures rose and faded along ancient shorelines, their remnants long lost to shifting waves? Entropy too is stronger in water. Salt corrodes, currents scatter carefully placed objects into patterns that look natural. Wood dissolves, fabric vanishes, bone dissolves into the chemistry of the sea. Even metals are eaten alive in the depths, their forms dissolving into oxides and rust until no shape remains. At depths so crushing that steel folds like paper, who can say what delicate forms once rested there? Not absence perhaps, but effacement, a quiet dissolving of what once was. And yet the ocean also preserves. In its coldest corners, in its stagnant basins where oxygen never reaches, shipwrecks remain hidden for centuries, their timbers still intact. Bones of whales lie strewn on the seabed, slowly colonized by life, holding a memory for far longer than air would ever allow. Pleistocene tools have been dredged from continental shelves, carved stones speaking faintly of hands that once worked beside now drowned rivers. These discoveries remind us that though the ocean erases, it also shelters. What else then might be waiting in some silent trench or forgotten plain? The most profound mystery of the ocean floor, however, is its silence. It hides its strata where almost no human eye has seen, where light itself cannot reach. We listen with sonar, we probe with machines, yet we understand only fragments. Could whole stories rest unimagined there? Civilizations erased so completely that we cannot even conceive of them. To speculate on the sea is to speculate on absence itself, an absence swollen with the possibility that more has been forgotten than remembered. And then comes time. The ocean floor holds clocks more precise than stone, written in isotope bands, in microfossils, in magnetic reversals of the crust itself. These clocks tell us of ancient shifts in the planet's field, of climate cycles swinging like pendulums, of extinctions rolling like tides. Each clock measures faithfully, but never forever, for even these clocks are dragged down, returned to magma, lost to the fire beneath. The archive dissolves with every generation renewed. What if every drowned shelf, every abyssal plain holds the faint signature of voices long extinguished? What if the silence of the sea is not the silence of nothing, but the silence of too much? Silence layered and layered again, until no human ear can separate its pieces. We stand by the shore and hear the waves breaking, but what we are hearing is time itself colliding with our senses, the present brushing against fragments of all that came before, not because the sea speaks clearly, but because it murmurs with memory too vast to translate. And if the oceans, with all their weight and silence, can hide so much, if they can cradle entire continents of memory and then erase them again, then what of other forces? For if water is an archivist of secrecy, what role does ice play in sculpting and erasing the memory of Earth? What role does ice play in sculpting and erasing the memory of Earth? Ice is patient, silent, immense. It advances not like fire or flood, but with the quiet inevitability of breath, a slow tide of crystal grinding across the land. Where it moves it does not preserve, it scours. Forests, valleys, soils rich with memory, all oppressed beneath its weight, stripped to bone, polished into smooth valleys. Ice is a keeper of fragments, but also a relentless destroyer of detail. When glaciers form, they are archives of atmosphere. Each layer of snow compacts into ice, enclosing bubbles of ancient breath, tiny globes of air untouched for tens, even hundreds of thousands of years. Within them lie records of carbon, of methane, of oxygen, frozen signatures of climates, once warm, once chilled, once pulsing with life, different from our own. To melt a glacier is to hear the whispers of vanished worlds. Yet even as ice preserves so delicately, it erases all beneath its crushing weight. Where once there were rivers and forests, glaciers carve out wide U-shaped valleys, lakes, and rock-strewn plains. The original story, the finer details of soil, bone, and architecture, if such ever existed, is erased under the grinding hand of ice. We may walk in places where entire ecosystems, even entire landscapes, have been erased clean, leaving no trace beyond the stones glaciers dragged behind them. Consider the Pleistocene, an age when ice sheets shrouded continents, advancing, retreating, advancing again. With each cycle came a reset. Whatever histories had lived in the soil were turned under, replaced by ice, crushed and washed away. Could it be that traces of civilizations, if they had been born in that shadowed time, were obliterated not by catastrophe alone, but by the slow, unstoppable hand of ice? Could memory itself have been erased as casually as rocks ground into gravel? And yet, glaciers also conceal. Buried within ice, we sometimes find mummified bodies, frozen with astonishing clarity, skin, hair, clothing intact. Seeds and spores remain viable after millennia, awakening when the ice loosens its grip. Even viruses sleep in their crystalline prisons, still capable of rising again when released. The paradox of ice is that it preserves perfectly at the surface of its layers and destroys completely beneath its weight. It is both archive and censor, a dual-handed sculptor of Earth's memory. Entropy, in the form of ice, operates on grand scales of time. Imagine an entire continent smoothed beneath sheets a mile thick. Imagine mountain ranges shaved down, entire valleys rearranged, every subtle marking erased as though painted over with a brush of silence. The violence is quiet, almost imperceptible in a single lifetime, but absolute across thousands of years. Even our strongest monuments, if placed beneath glaciers, would crumble, crushed until not a trace remained. Scientists map the paths of ancient ice by the scars it leaves, striations in bedrock, erratic boulders carried hundreds of miles, layers of ground moraine. These are the signatures of erasure written across landscapes with blunt force. A glacier does not discriminate, it consumes equally. A sheltering forest, a hunting ground, even a settlement with fires burning in its hearth, if placed in the path of ice, would vanish without witness, its story erased. The fur. So we are left to wonder how much of Earth's memory, how many entire chapters lie beneath the blankness of glacial silence. Could there have been voices here, long ago, drowned, not by noise or disaster, but by the soft, grinding lull of endless winters? Perhaps what haunts us most is not the violence of ice, but its patience. Fire rages and passes quickly. Floods come and go, but ice lingers for millennia, erasing persistently, erasing wholly. What it chooses to preserve is delicate, almost intimate. An air bubble, a leaf, a fragment of skin. What it erases is immeasurable, lives, lands, civilizations. And as glaciers retreat, as they are now, they reveal landscapes born anew, as if nothing ever lived there before. Valleys stretch, empty and fresh, bare as though waiting to be named again. But deep within us we suspect that they are not new. They are palimpse, old stories scraped away until rewritten, maybe more than once, maybe endlessly. We watch ice vanish today with rapid speed, rivers of meltwater carrying memory into the sea. From the air, glaciers glisten like glass, their surfaces riddled with dark scars, melt ponds, fractures. They remind us that archives too can disappear, that absence may become permanent. Could we be living at the end of the ice's capacity to remember, or is this but another cycle, one archive closing while another opens? And if ice has the power to both preserve and annihilate, then what of fire, the other element that reshapes, that encases, that erases with molten certainty? Then what of fire, the other element that reshapes, that encases, that erases with molten certainty? If ice is the slow eraser, then fire is the sudden curtain fall, swift and unrelenting. Volcanoes, impact craters, wildfires that span horizons, all are the planet's more abrupt gestures, changing landscapes and fates in minutes rather than millennia. Where glaciers grind patiently, catastrophe arrives like a strike of silence, a decisive vanishing of what came before. Volcanoes make and unmake memory at once. Lava flows entomb whole forests in seconds, freezing them in stone like ghosts, bark and root preserved though life itself is long gone. Villages, too, have been captured mid-breath beneath swirling ash. The eruption of Vesuvius preserved Pompeii, not in ruins but in pause, people caught in their last gestures, walls standing tall until time itself broke them apart. Yet for every site preserved, hundreds vanish more completely, incinerated, scattered in clouds of gas, their places covered by new rock. Fire records mercilessly, either everything or nothing. And beyond volcanic flame, there are the greater curtains still, asteroid impacts that deliver endings in seconds. One such impact 66 million years ago painted the skies with burning forests, choked the atmosphere in dust so thick it silenced sunlight for years. 3/4 of Earth's species vanished in the curtain's fall. For the dinosaurs, it was the end. For us, it was the prelude. In that single instant, an entire age of memory was shut forever, and a new chapter began. What if others too were erased in moments like this? Civilizations made not of humans but of forms we no longer know. Maybe their curtain came not from an asteroid but from some volcanic night, or a chain of wildfires that swept entire coasts. In a single storm of fire, whole landscapes that had carried lives might have been rendered indistinguishable from bare rock. Could it be that the gaps in our record do not mark gradual decline, but the sudden collapse of curtains drawn closed with violent speed? Entropy works slowly, yes, but catastrophe is entropy's companion, fast, irreversible, covering history not in dust of centuries, but in layers of ash meters deep. These ash layers are written in rock, telling us of the great extinctions and their aftermaths. Yet what lies beneath the ash is erased. A settlement pressed beneath volcanic flow becomes as silent as the forest beneath it, equalized, indistinct. Memory does not discriminate when fire arrives. Between layers of sediment we see thin bands of iridium, dark stripes of soot. These are signatures of the curtains, the moments when Earth's stability collapsed. To hold one in your hand is to feel the echo of catastrophe still humming across deep time. Could one of these stripes also be the grave marker of a civilization erased before we even knew it existed? Not because the evidence was weak, but because it was caught beneath the curtain at its most merciless. And yet, catastrophe, like ice, has its dual role. Fire erases, but sometimes what it erases it also preserves. A Pompeii, a fossilized forest, a body ionized in ash. Catastrophe leaves us scenes of impossible intimacy, fragments that would have dissolved in ordinary time. Perhaps older catastrophes too have left isolated relics hidden beneath stone, waiting for us to wonder whether they are the remains of creatures alone, or minds that once looked outward as we do tonight. Curtains fall, always. Behind them, memory is locked or destroyed, but every curtain also forces a reset, an opening act for what follows. Out of ashes, new life emerges, new experiments grow, which leaves us always asking, was something erased here, or was something born? Maybe both. Maybe every beginning is written over the ending of another. And so we drift from fire onward, past the curtains of ash and lava, toward the broader silences that lie between epochs. For if catastrophe is sudden and loud, what waits in the stillness between cataclysms, the long, quiet stretches of earth when little seems to happen at all? What waits in the stillness between cataclysms, the long, quiet stretches of earth when little seems to happen at all? The silence between epochs is deeper than any crater, wider than any glacier's path. It is not the absence of life, but the persistence of it. The long, slow breathing of oceans, forests, deserts, tundra. In these quiet intervals, time feels endless. Histories dissolve into calm patterns without sharp edges. And yet, perhaps hidden inside these stillnesses, lies a greater mystery than even the drama of extinction. Most of Earth's story is not fire or fury, but this kind of silence, tens of millions of years can pass with no asteroid impacts to mark their boundaries, no volcanic cataclysms to redraw the shapes of continents. In this vast canvas of quiet, rivers erode mountains, grain by grain, seas carry their sediments outward, climates oscillate in steady rhythm. For us these would be imperceptible shifts, slower even than dreams. But silence itself is deceptive. It is the blank page where stories vanish most completely. In the fossil record, these silent intervals appear as steady bands of stone, long unbroken layers where little seems to change. And yet within them experiments were unfolding, strange species emerging in niches, vanishing with no sign, ecosystems forming delicate networks and then fading. Few of these left fossilized remains, millions of lives lived and gone, erased not by disaster but by this vast indifference of time. Could it also be in these quiet folds that civilizations, or proto-civilizations, once had their chance? Not in moments of fire, but in moments of equilibrium when nothing interfered with their growth until slow erasure softened every trace away. Silence works in geologic memory the way dust does in human memory. It covers, it dulls, it makes detail hazy. In epochs without catastrophe, memory blurs, not because nothing happened, but because in the sameness, everything dissolves into background. Glimpses may remain here and there, a fossilized leaf, a tooth, a footprint, but the larger story woven around them fades into suspension. Scientists sometimes call these stretches background extinction or normal time. Yet what an odd phrase that is, for normal time could last longer than every recorded word of human history multiplied 1,000-fold. Within these lengths there is room enough for the rise and fall of unimaginable things, worlds we cannot see. Could we call it silence then? Or have we mistaken the absence of catastrophe for absence itself? Is it possible that memory, whether planetary or personal, requires contrast? We remember sudden events because they stand apart. We see volcanic ash marks in stone because they interrupt. But in uniform stretches, in slow sameness, the memory of the earth becomes transparent. So perhaps the silence between epochs is not the quieting of history, but the thickest veil of forgetting it possesses. Consider again the isotopic record, those delicate fingerprints sealed into rocks and corals. Even there, in periods of calm, the signals smear into indistinct patterns, warming and cooling, rising and falling seas. They are there, but they blur. Uniformity hides more than chaos. And if memory of climate can vanish, even when the signal is written directly into stone, what chance would the subtler traces of thought or culture hold, if such things once lived in those intervals? There is something haunting about a silence that lasts millions of years, a silence so deep that an entire civilization could rise, explore, collapse, and vanish twice over without leaving anything to disturb the geological calm. And we would never know. Their bones might dissolve with nothing to fossilize them. Their artifacts might corrode entirely away. Their landscapes might return to dust long before any catastrophe arrived to capture them in ash or resin. Could this be the truest disappearance, the softest erasure, not the violence of fire or ice, but the soft embrace of time itself, empty in its constancy? And yet, silence has its own music. Just as a pause in a melody allows us to hear more intensely, perhaps the long quiet epochs carry resonances we have not yet learned to listen for. Gaps in the fossil record, subtle anomalies in isotope ratios, faint hints that something stirred and was erased before it could be written. Maybe the silence is not hollow at all, but full of layers too subtle for us to touch. We look into these stillnesses and see nothing, but perhaps they are like night skies. What seems black is teeming with more stars than our eyes can discern. Could the silence between epochs be similarly rich? Perhaps it is a kind of dark archive, one that hides its story too well. And if silence itself can be so vast, so deliberate, so erasing and so mysterious, then what hand shapes it? If time forgets, who or what does the forgetting? Could entropy alone be the archivist? Or is silence itself a kind of agent, choosing what remains? Maybe, maybe not. And yet, if silence alone erases more history than catastrophe, then we must wonder what kind of editor entropy truly is. Does it erase evenly, or does it select? If the silence between epochs is not empty but curated, then perhaps the earth has already sculpted the record into a story it wanted to keep. Which makes us wonder, if entropy is not only destruction but curation, then what kind of archaeologist, what kind of careful editor is it, and what truths has it chosen to discard? If the earth has sculpted its own record, then perhaps entropy is not simply a force of loss, but a kind of archaeologist in reverse, curating, rearranging, deciding what remains and what is erased. We often think of entropy as the enemy of memory. It dissolves papers into dust. breaks stones into sand, lets languages fall silent, lets stars grow cold. But perhaps there is another way to see it. Not enemy, but editor. Not chaos, but selection. An archaeologist who works not with tools, but with time itself. Entropy is patient. It touches everything without effort, nudging order toward disorder. Iron rusts, granite fractures, oceans grind cliffs into silt. Every structure, no matter how grand, must bow to its hand, but notice what is left behind. The fossils we hold today, the layered strata in cliffs, the isotopic trails in stalagmites, these are not accidents alone. They are the curated leftovers. They are what entropy chose not to erase, what it allowed to endure. Could it be that entropy is shaping the story as much as any surviving artifact shapes our perception of the past? Consider how archaeologists interpret broken pottery. The fragments do not tell us the full story, yet from shapes and edges they build images of entire cultures. The fragments survive because the softer materials, cloth, voices, gestures of living were erased. We may think we see the truth, but really we see entropy's choice of what remains. If this is true of centuries, how much truer is it of epochs? For billions of years, entropy has been curating the record of Earth, keeping only fragments, discarding almost everything else. Even isotopes themselves whisper of selection. Uranium decays slowly enough that we rid time through its half-life, but polonium, short-lived, leaves no signature we can trace. Entropy left us uranium, erased polonium, curated which clocks we are allowed to hold. In caves, dripstone stalactites record the faint memory of long-gone rains, but the rains themselves, their clouds, their passing winds, are lost. We inherit the archive, not as it was, but as entropy sculpted it. We inherit the silences as much as we inherit the echoes. And then there is the deepest question: does entropy erase randomly, or with a pattern that creates its own story? Are the fossils we have, the shells, bones, teeth, not just coincidence, but the edited highlights of a grander archive, one pared down deliberately by time's hand? It is unsettling to think that what we know of Earth is not only incomplete, but curated in ways we can never untangle. Maybe that is why the fossil record appears biased. Why shells fossilize more easily than flowers, why bones endure but voices disappear. It is not because shells are more important, but because shells endure where petals cannot. In this way, we confuse durability with meaning. We think bones hold more weight than whispers, not because they did, but because entropy let us find them. Could the same be true of civilizations? The traces we never find may outnumber the fragments we do. Entire histories could dissolve without one shard to suggest they ever were. Which leads us back to possibility. If entropy is an archaeologist, what if its selections are less about accident than intention, though not intention as we know it, but a natural bias, a leaning toward dissolving the subtle and keeping the stubborn? If so, then we must recognize that the Earth we reconstruct is the Earth as entropy presents it, not the full Earth that once was. And perhaps this explains the uncanny feeling we sometimes have while looking at ancient landscapes, the sense of something missing, of a story half heard. It is not imagination only, but intuition. We sense the presence of absence. We stand among fragments that are not merely random survivals, but the curated leftovers chosen by time's strange archivist. So maybe entropy does not destroy as much as it sculpts, sculpting absence into shape, silence into structure. It leaves us bones but not songs, teeth but not laughter, stone but not stories. It gives us fossils but not futures. It teaches us humility, that what survives is never the whole truth, only the version that entropy decided to leave behind. And yet, if entropy is indeed the planet's archaeologist, then what shall we make of its most faithful archive? The deep seams of carbon, the compressed memories of forests, the forgotten rainforests now entombed beneath our feet. Deep beneath our feet lie the compressed shadows of vanished rainforests, trunks taller than houses, ferns wider than doorways, mosses that rose into trees, whole green cities of life now condensed into black seams of coal. To hold a piece in your hand is to cradle the silence of a forest that breathed 300 million years ago. A forest that thrummed with creatures we no longer see, under skies carrying air almost twice as rich in oxygen as today. These compressed memories are not just fuel, not just matter. Coal is planetary memory, a forest folded into stone, still carrying its photosynthetic breath within. The Carboniferous period, so long before us, belonged to plants. Towering lycopsids reached heights unseen since dragonflies spanned 0.5 meter across. Amphibians walked in humid swamps that stretched across entire continents, and beneath the canopy decomposition was slow, imperfect. When trees fell, their bodies did not fully return to air. Year upon year, century after century, carbon accumulated, pressed downward beneath new growth. Each forest layered over the one before it. In time, entropy transformed living matter into seams of coal. Life and death folded into black pages of Earth's memory book. And yet we rarely pause to think, a seam of coal is not just carbon, it is architecture in reverse. A forest collapsed into its elemental essence. Sometimes within the seams, imprints of bark remain, fine patterns etched sharper than any drawing. In some seams we find entire trunks preserved, recognizable even after millions of years. They are fossils of memory itself, and what if, among these forests, possibilities once stirred, could other forms of awareness have taken root there? Not human, not animal, but vegetal, a memory expressed through canopy and root, through the endless chorus of leaves. Perhaps coal is more than preserved carbon. Perhaps it is the silence of an intelligence that was never ours. Geologists study these seams not only for fuel but for isotopic signatures. The carbon trapped within them testifies to ancient atmospheres, to cycles of climate, to oxygen levels that shaped the evolution of wings, lungs, and life itself. In coal, there is more than residue. There is a record, scientific and mysterious at once. Yet coal reminds us of something else too, of forgetting. For if forests became stone, then what lived within them, songs, movements, ephemeral lives, have been erased. What remains is only the presence of absence, the carbon, but not the canopy. Coal holds within it another paradox. For hundreds of millions of years it remained buried, compressed, sleeping silently, and then, in what is to Earth but the blink of an eye, humans began to exhume it, burn it, return its locked breath back into the air. We release the forgotten forests into our atmosphere, mixing carboniferous memory with the world of today. We burn silence into heat, absence into energy. Perhaps all along these forests were not lost, but waiting, not for themselves, but for us. And so in every flame flickering from coal, a fragment of that ancient rainforest exhales once more. And yet, what might have been locked away along with the forests. We treat coal as resource, forgetting it is fossil, not fossil of animals for the most part, but fossil of ecosystems, of entire verdant worlds. Could subtle traces of other creatures, maybe even human-like ones if such once existed, be tangled in its seams, compressed beyond easy recognition? We know coal contains anomalies, strange minerals, occasional ores, even artifacts debated, dismissed as coincidence. Could it be we are staring at the blurred handwriting of something older than our memory allows? When we think of coal, we imagine black fuel, but perhaps it is better seen as a library of forests that lived and died in layers deeper than history, a library that entropy buried, that silence concealed, that we now, by burning, are erasing forever. What if this is the last time their breath will ever touch the atmosphere again? What if every fire we light is also an act of forgetting, as much as remembrance? And so the seams stretch beneath us like archives closed too tightly to read, vast, dark corridors of silent plant memory, stacked deeper than the roots that once fed them. We walk above them unknowing, cities rising where once the trees rose. This soil is not merely ground. Our foundations may be laid over entire forgotten forests, erased but still shaping our present. And if coal reminds us of life erased and fossilized into black stone, then what might sand remind us of? Sand that was once mountains, once glass, once ancient coastlines. What other stories of Earth lie hidden in the grains we scatter and step upon every day? What other stories lie hidden in the grains we scatter and step upon every day? The desert reminds us. It is not empty, though to the hurried eye it seems barren. It is an ocean of time made visible, dunes rising like frozen waves, plains stretching farther than sight can hold. To step into a desert is to step into a library of wind, where each grain of sand has already lived 1,000 lives, as mountain, as stone, as crystal, fractured and carried, dissolved and reborn. In the desert, Earth spreads before us with deceptive simplicity, and yet behind that simplicity lies a depth beyond reckoning. Every grain of sand is an artifact of pressure and erosion, broken from cliffs or coral reefs, polished by river and sea, scattered by storms. What we call sand is really the memory of larger forms undone, entropy written so finely it slips through our fingers. But sand is also a keeper of traces. Within it are tiny fossils, fragments of shells, pollen blown from far-off valleys, minerals shaped by eruptions, even microscopic shards of meteorites fallen from space. Entire histories fall into deserts, carried invisibly by wind, until one dune becomes an anthology of places, a mingling of journeys long forgotten. And the dunes themselves are alive with motion. Gust by gust, storms rearrange memory across the landscape. What was buried yesterday is revealed today, only to be covered again tomorrow. Archaeologists know this well. Temples, bones, pottery, inscriptions all vanish suddenly beneath sand, sealed in silence until wind uncovers them again. It is as though the desert insists that memory is not lost, only displaced, wrapped in the patience of shifting grains. Could there be older things still, entire landscapes, entire cities not yet uncovered, waiting beneath meters of silence to breathe again? Science notes the patterns written on the surface. Some dunes are star dunes, colossal ridges shaped from every direction, rising like pyramids carved by air. Others form vast belts stretching for hundreds of kilometers, as though time itself is being combed into the land. These are not accidents. They are memories written in geomorphology, the story of prevailing winds, of changing climates, of storms whose breath lasted not minutes but centuries. To walk across the desert is to walk across the signatures of air, a story still being written, one grain at a time. Yet the desert is also capable of preservation so delicate it verges on miraculous. Buried beneath sands, bodies have lain intact for millennia, spared from decay by dryness. Textiles, pigments, the faintest carvings all remain as if time itself paused. Sands erase surfaces harshly, but protect interiors tenderly. It is another paradox of memory. The same element that destroys also preserves, depending only on depth and chance. Could it be that entire forgotten ages rest preserved beneath desert silence, intact but unseen? When we close our eyes and listen, perhaps we can almost hear the desert speaking. A low hush, the sibilant language of air gliding over endless particles. It is an archive without script, recorded in sound and form rather than letters. But like every archive, it is incomplete. Entropy here is relentless. Sand shifts endlessly, obliterating its own story even as it writes. How many traces have been swallowed by dunes forever, never to see light again? How much has been erased not through violence but through the gentlest covering imaginable, a handful of grains, repeated endlessly until memory disappears. Geologists search deserts for hidden signals. The grain-size distribution that reveals ancient rivers now gone, the mineral composition pointing to vanished mountain ranges, the subtle layering that speaks of climates long past. Isotopes of oxygen and carbon tell us of wet periods and dry spells, whispering of rainfall thousands of years ago, where no drop falls today. In these quiet measurements we glimpse vast cycles, where deserts bloom into grasslands, then return to silence again. Could greater changes have happened too? Could whole societies have flourished in green valleys where now only dust remains? And if so, how fully could wind erase them? The desert is not barren. It is transitional. It swallows, it reveals, it waits. Every hurricane season shifts the dunes. Every century reveals or buries again. Even now, small fragments surface, polished stones chipped by ancient hands, bones bleached by sun, shards of forgotten tools. We marvel at their survival, but we rarely ask how many such fragments still lie buried deeper beyond our touch. Perhaps the truth is not that the desert has no memory, but that it hoards too much and will not let it go all at once. Philosophically, the desert is the embodiment of silence, not silence as emptiness, but silence as fullness, silence as depth. Absence here is not void. It is the presence of hiddenness, the insistence that memory can exist without visibility. Maybe every dune line is a volume closed too tightly to open, a book whose words we know are there but cannot yet read. And perhaps that is why the desert stirs awe inside us. Its immensity humbles, but its silence unsettles. We sense secrets slumbering just beneath its surface. Maybe ruins, maybe fossils, maybe nothing but rock. Yet if every grain is a fragment of memory, then the desert is not an absence at all. It is the greatest presence we cannot grasp. And so, as we leave the desert's hush and step back into the wider world, we carry its lesson. That memory can be both visible and hidden, preserved and erased in the same gesture. That silence is not denial but waiting. And if wind can archive whole worlds in grains of sand, what then might be carried invisibly through the sky itself? What traces ride not in dunes or valleys, but in the fine dust-crossing oceans, drifting unseen into the very air we breathe? What then might be carried invisibly through the sky itself? The air we breathe is not empty. It is an ocean of dust, a slow-moving current of tiny fragments drifting all around us. Every breath we take is filled with histories we cannot see. Desert sand carried across seas, volcanic ash rising from fire, pollen lifted from ancient valleys, even the minute remains of bones ground to powder by glaciers long dissolved. Dust is everywhere, always falling and always rising again, a cycle of memory as constant as wind. To think of dust as dirt is to miss its greater story. Each particle is a traveller, a splintered leaf from a forest long vanished, a fleck of rock once belonging to a mountain now levelled, a grain of silt that once lay on an ocean floor. Some have been carried for thousands of kilometers, crossing entire continents, feeding life far from where they began. Sahara dust nourishes the Amazon rainforest. Volcanic particles alter climates half the world away. And when we breathe, we take these fragments into ourselves, carrying within our lungs the silent memory of entire regions, entire epochs. Dust is more than fragments of earth. It is also fragments of time. Deep within ice cores, scientists find layers of dust that trace winds and deserts from hundreds of thousands of years ago. Each layer is a fingerprint of climate, what the winds carried, what the earth allowed to rise. Some layers speak of droughts, others of volcanic winters, still others of the vast migrations of particles that followed great changes long before we were here to witness them. The memory of dust is both global and fragile, delicate grains telling stories bigger than mountains. And then there is cosmic dust, particles from space, descending into our atmosphere as though the stars themselves were seeding our skies. Some settle unseen on rooftops and soil, others fuse in fire on their fall, vanishing before they touch the ground. To study these grains is to hold interstellar memory itself, older than Earth, older than even the sun. Imagine every day thousands of tons of stardust fall upon us, a quiet mingling of planetary and celestial histories. What if memory is not Earth's alone, but the universe's, scattered invisibly into the air we share? Philosophically, dust is the symbol of impermanence. Everything becomes dust in time. Empires, mountains, seas, even stars. Dust does not signify only endings but transitions. It is not destruction but dispersal. What once was solid becomes subtle, nearly invisible, yet never gone. What disappears from sight remains in breath, carried forward into new forms. Could dust, then, be Earth's most candid archive, the record so dispersed that it becomes untraceable, yet never truly lost? When we breathe the world. Pollen from ancient trees, microfossils from oceans, soot from fires long extinguished, all mingle inside us. Not because we seek them, but because they are everywhere. Dust makes us participants in Earth's memory. We do not witness passively. We inhale it, carry it, return it. We ourselves become part of its archive. And dust, for all its gentleness, is also powerful. Climatic shifts often hinge upon it. A veil of volcanic ash can cool entire decades, shade the planet until crops fail and species falter. Fine particles carried upward change the balance of light, scattering, warming, or cooling the Earth in subtle planetary rhythms. Dust is both delicate and decisive, reminding us that even the smallest fragments shape the grand body of time. But beyond the science lies a quieter wonder. The next time light drifts through a room and you see motes floating in air, consider how old they may be, how far they may have traveled. Some may carry the residue of glaciers that melted 10,000 years ago. Some may be flakes from deserts formed before human civilization began. Some may be remnants of beings no eye has ever seen, dissolved long before names could be given. Each speck is a whisper of something that once had form and place. And perhaps this is why dust unsettles us, even as it fascinates. It collects on shelves, on old books, on forgotten windowsills. We call it neglect. But dust is not the mark of absence. It is the mark of presence, of continual return. The world does not stop leaving pieces of itself behind. The forgotten always comes back in finer, subtler form. So we live surrounded by a constant ocean of particles, rising and falling, erasing and preserving, settling upon us even as we exhale. Dust may be the truest reminder that nothing is ever wholly gone. Everything dissolves, yes, but everything also circulates. Nothing disappears. It only becomes finer, carried into air, awaiting discovery by lungs, by light, by chance. And if even the air itself carries so much forgotten memory, if every breath is the mingling of lives gone and lives beginning, then what might be written not in dust but in stone itself, aligned to sky, arranged in ways that outlast centuries? Could the echoes we sense in ancient stone circles be another archive, another way the past reaches forward toward us? Could the echoes we sense in ancient stone circles be another archive, another way the past reaches forward toward us? Standing before such stones, we know instinctively that they are not accidental, arranged against sky and horizon. Their silhouettes hold intention. They do not tell us what that intention was, not in words, not in inscriptions, but in alignment, in shadow, in silence. Some mark the solstice sunrise, others trace the arc of the moon. Their geometry is not speech, but orchestration. To stand inside one is to stand inside an instrument tuned to the rhythms of the cosmos. Stone has a different kind of memory from dust. Where dust drifts and disperses, stone endures. The circles scattered across valleys and hills, from the standing stones of the British Isles to ancient alignments in distant deserts, are stubborn fragments of intention. They are fossils of culture rather than biology, the kind of fossils that entropy does not erase so easily. Yet even stone forgets. Weather wears edges flat, lichen obscures carvings, erosion buries half of what was once whole. We know little of who placed them, less still of why. Silence fills the gaps where story should be. And yet, in their emptiness, we listen harder. Could these circles be more than calendars? Could they be echoes of ways of knowing that reached back further than we allow ourselves to imagine, perhaps into forgotten epochs, perhaps tracing traditions not of a single culture, but of many layers, passed down from lands and ages already lost. The science tells us that stone rings embody astronomical awareness, patterns within them aligned to solstices, equinoxes, even lunar cycles across decades. To achieve this required observation, patience, memory. Long before clocks, before writing, people measured time with shadows cast across stone. In that act, memory was given form not in fragile parchment, but in granite, basalt, sandstone. Structures too heavy to be carried away, too stubborn to vanish quickly. Memory made durable, but mute. We step among these stones today, feeling something both alien and familiar. Alien, because their makers' voices are gone. Familiar, because we too look upward, mark cycles, seek to place meaning in the sky. Echoes resonate through us, not because the stones speak clearly, but because they hum faintly with a focus that we still share. Could it be that in this way stone circles are like fossils, partial, suggestive, more absence than presence, yet powerful for what they imply? And then comes the deeper wonder, what if some of these circles are older still than we believe? Stone wanders easily between ages. A boulder can be lifted, reset, reused. One circle may carry the intentions of many cultures across millennia. Some alignments we measure may be inheritances, not inventions. Perhaps what endures is not the single tradition we can carbon date nearby charcoal for, but the echo of something passed from a forgotten hand to another, across a silence too long for us to imagine. Even now we struggle to read them. Erosion has softened lines, tumbled pillars, hidden smaller stones beneath earth. Archaeology offers hypotheses, but certainty slips away with each interpretation. The circles, like dust, remain archives of ambiguity, not because they are empty, but because their fullness is written in a language we no longer speak. Soft repetition clings to them. Each sunrise over a circle is like the breath of its makers returning, even if their names are gone. Each shadow that stretches across its aligned stone is an echo repeating across centuries. Perhaps this is how memory survives when words fail, not through explicit records but through echoes repeated endlessly until the cycle itself becomes the archivist. And yet, stone circles raise questions even as they endure. Were they calendars, temples, instruments of sound, or were they the last surviving gestures of cultures already vanishing, building echoes of something still older, something erased completely? We do not know, and we may never know. But standing among them, silence feels less like absence and more like invitation. Invitation to wonder, to ask, to feel the echo even if the meaning is gone. So we step again beyond stone, carrying its stillness with us. For stone, like dust, preserves in fragment. It hints more than it speaks. And if stone can linger with echoes intact, then what of ice and fire, the forces that both shatter and preserve their own memories? Could glaciers and volcanoes too have left echoes longer than words, buried away in frozen prisms and flows of molten rock? Then what of ice and fire, the two great archivists and destroyers of Earth, one cold, one hot, one flowing with the slowness of centuries, the other erupting in seconds with a roar that reshapes horizons? They seem opposed, yet they belong to the same story, the story of erasure and preservation, of forgetting and memory caught in elemental form. To stand before either is to feel both awe and dread, for ice and fire are reminders that nothing on this planet is permanent. Yet in their transience, each records in its own way, ice preserving breath, fire preserving form, both carrying whispers of worlds now gone. Glaciers, those slow rivers of ice, are time machines disguised as mountains. Their layers hold air older than cities, older than languages, older than any human dream. Within deep cores of polar ice, bubbles reveal levels of carbon dioxide, methane and oxygen, stitched together into a long atmospheric diary. Glacial ice is memory slowed, hardened, folded into sheets that keep whispers safe across ages. And yet in moving, glaciers erase. They gouge and grind, dragging boulders across valleys, scouring soil down to bare rock. Whatever rests beneath them, whether forests, bones, or markings of culture, is reduced, rearranged, unrecognizable. Ice preserves the sky but consumes the ground. It is both archivist and censor, keeper and eraser. And then there is fire. If ice is the handwriting of stillness, fire is punctuation, sharp, final, immediate. Volcanoes erupt without warning, covering landscapes in molten rock, burying entire moments in a single flow. Trees incinerate, grasses vaporize, creatures flee, and yet, in those violent instants, fire creates memory too. Ash preserves shapes in negative, leaves etched like fingerprints, bodies held in hollow forms, cities frozen in their last heartbeat, as happened at Pompeii. Lava turns liquid into stone so fast that what should vanish instead remains. Flames erase, but they also encase, capturing instants that under gentler conditions would leave no record at all. Perhaps this is the paradox we must accept. Memory is not uniform. It is uneven, selective. What seems fragile may endure if caught in fire, while what seems strong may vanish if pressed beneath the slow weight of ice. Bone and bark might survive in volcanic ash, while stone monuments crumble silently under glaciers. Preservation is not about strengths but about circumstance, about the whims of heat and cold, of entropy expressed in two opposing ways. Consider too the signals ice and fire leave in stone. In Greenland cores we trace abrupt temperature shifts, volcanic dust layers, isotopic fingerprints of long-forgotten eruptions. In lava flows we find tree molds, empty spaces where trunks once stood, now vanished but outlined in stone. Even at scales beyond human, both ice and fire leave messages. Magnetic stripes on oceanic crust preserve the flipping of Earth's poles, fire-frozen barcodes of planetary rhythm. Ice Age moraines line entire valleys, ridges of debris dropped like the punctuation marks of vanishing glaciers. Each signal is both presence and absence. What we see immediately suggests what has been erased. And yet, there is speculation too. If civilizations rose in the deep past lost to us now, perhaps ice and fire erased them most completely. Ice grinding down their homes, fire swallowing their traces, leaving only subtle anomalies, a shard mistaken for mineral, a layer of carbon mistaken for natural fire. Could entire histories lie within the very places we trust to preserve? Could archives double as tombs? We can never say with certainty, for both ice and fire preserve only fragments, and entropy speaks most loudly in what it withholds. Philosophically, this duality is profound. Think of memory within us, some details frozen, unchanging, preserved clearly across decades. Others burned into us by sudden events, sharp and unforgettable. Our own remembering mirrors the planet's. The slow freeze of habit, the sudden blaze of catastrophe, both create the archives of our minds. Perhaps Earth and consciousness work according to the same laws, written differently, but sung in harmony. To watch glacier ice melt into streams is to see memory dissolving, bubbles of ancient atmosphere rising into air, returning at last to sky. To watch lava cool into solid ridges is to see memory sealed, liquid fire transforming into stone, becoming a page no rainfall can dissolve. That ice vanishes, that lava endures. These imbalances shape what we know of the past, and what we may never know at all. And perhaps this is the lesson Earth is whispering. Memory is always fragile, no matter how solid it seems. The frozen air in ice, the encased shapes in ash, they too will vanish in time. Even fire and ice, we must remember, are impermanent. One melts, the other weathers, and still they leave echoes, faint signals we can listen for. So when we look to the glaciers or climb old volcanic flows, we are walking through archives disguised as destruction. Archives telling us that nothing is ever truly forgotten, only carried in forms we struggle to translate. Some memories condensed into frozen air, Some burned into the contours of rock, both holding reminders of what once was. And if ice and fire, in all their violence, still manage to preserve something of what they touch, then what of rivers? The quieter archivists of time, carving bones into valleys, carrying silt across millennia, preserving their own story in courses long since dried away. Then what of rivers? The quieter archivists of time, never still, yet always tracing paths across the body of earth. If ice preserves through silence and fire through suddenness, then rivers preserve through motion, constantly rewriting the land, yet leaving memory pressed within its courses. A river might appear fleeting, shifting banks and meanders across decades, but its true story unfolds across millions of years. Its valleys, terraces, deltas, and canyons are bones, the skeleton of its history laid bare for anyone able to read. Water is restless, but it is also patient. Drop by drop, grain by grain, it carves mountains into sediment, then ferries that sediment toward the sea. In this slow migration, pieces of everything the river touches are carried forward, rock dissolved into ions, soil scattered, fragments of shell, pollen, even the traces of lives once lived along its banks. Over deep time, rivers become transporters of memory, binding regions together through their ceaseless flow. When we hold a handful of river silt, we hold an anthology gathered from forests, fields, glaciers, and cliffs. We hold a world in miniature. But rivers are not only carriers, they are shapers. The Grand Canyon is nothing more than the voice of the Colorado, cutting through stone for millions of years. Valley after valley across the world remembers vanished rivers through their forms. Winding oxbows dried into crescent coves, terraced ridges, left after floods subsided, channels that once flourished only to be abandoned. These dry courses are fossils of water, just as bones reveal the shape of creatures long gone. A dry riverbed reveals the shape of flow, of vanished climates, of landscapes we can no longer walk. Water carves its bones into earth, even when the water itself is gone. Science has learned to read these river bones. Layered sediments can reveal tens of thousands of years of rainfall, drought, and erosion. By examining isotopes carried within river deposits, we can trace fluctuations in monsoons, the waxing and waning of glaciers, even the rise and fall of ancient lakes. Within these isotopes lie hidden climates, entire past worlds reconstructed from grains once carried freely in the current. Is it possible that in these isotopic whispers we also carry unrecognized stories, signals of vanished ecosystems, or even older, stranger presences drowned with no other witness? The rivers themselves, like civilizations, live and die. They are born in glacial melt, in mountain rains, in springs that burst from stone. They grow, feeding valleys and plains. They meander, splitting into distributaries that sketch deltas into the sea. And then, eventually, they die. A riverbed dries as climates shift, or its waters are diverted, or ice retreats, and never returns. Yet even a dead river remembers. Its bones remain in terraces of sediment, in cliff faces cut too precisely to be mistaken. To walk a dry riverbed is to walk the footprint of something that once moved through the landscape like blood through veins. Civilizations too have grown beside rivers, always drawn to the fertility of their banks. The Nile, the Indus, the Yellow River, each of these names recalls not just water but culture, life, continuity. But how many other rivers once carried the weight of cultures we do not remember? How many riverbanks are now deserts, where sands whisper over bones of channels buried too deeply to be seen? Could entire societies older than any we know have thrived upon rivers now vanished, their artifacts ground to silt, carried outward into seas that folded them into anonymity? Rivers, unlike glaciers or volcanoes, are rarely violent. They do not erase all at once. They erode and carry patiently, dispersing memory until it exists everywhere and nowhere. A bone on a riverbank is soon scattered, softened, turned into particles, and over centuries its elements may be shared across wide estuaries, across oceans. Memory diffuses here, dissolved into waters that feed countless new lives. Perhaps rivers remind us that forgetting is not always destructive, it can also be distributive, scattering the past into the present so thoroughly that nothing need be lost, only transformed. But rivers betray too. They flood, rearrange, wash away whole communities in hours. They expose bones that had lain hidden for centuries, then conceal them again beneath the next surge of silt. Each flood is an opening and a closing of the archive, liberation of secrets, followed almost immediately by new concealment. Could it be that floods sometimes deliver not only remnants of trees and soil, but hints of something deeper, fragments of stories we know nothing of, swept out of one age and into another? In this way, rivers embody both presence and absence. They are sculptors of valleys and dispersers of memory. They are the veins of earth carrying fragments of yesterday into tomorrow. Their bones, dry beds, carved canyons, ancient deltas, are left as enduring testimony to their long wanderings. Yet most of what they carried is too finely scattered for us to retrieve. And so, as we walk along riverbeds that no longer flow, we are reminded of their paradox. Rivers do not resist time. They perform it. They do not save memory intact. They scatter it widely, and perhaps in that scattering lies their secret gift. Nothing vanishes fully. It only drifts. It only journeys. If rivers are bones of motion, endlessly carried and rearranged, then what of the creatures who walked beside them? Creatures that nearly spoke, that nearly remembered, that nearly crossed the threshold into thought as we know it. What of the creatures who walked beside the rivers? Creatures that nearly spoke, that nearly remembered, that nearly crossed the threshold into thought as we know it. Evolution is a branching tree, full of lives that blossomed briefly at the edge of possibility. Lives that might have changed the story of consciousness forever, had they endured just a little longer. The Earth has carried countless such experiments, and most are forgotten. Yet sometimes when we study fossils or listen to the strange patterns of living animals, we sense echoes of voices that almost were. Consider the whales, vast and patient, whose songs ripple across entire oceans. They sing in patterns, in refrains, in rhythms that extend for hours. Though we cannot fully translate their music, its complexity feels deliberate, its repetitions uncannily like poetry. Researchers know their calls evolve across time, spreading through pods like shifting fashions, a culture of sound encoded in salt water. Could it be that whales are singers of memory, carrying an intelligence parallel to ours, one that speaks not through artifacts or stone, but through vibration and echo? Had the oceans shifted differently, might we live now in a world where songs, not writing, were the dominant record of memory? Or think of ravens and crows, shaping sticks into tools, bending wires, caching food in hiding places they remember months later. They recognize faces. They call to one another with nuance, with dialects that differ between flocks. Perhaps here too is the beginning of a grammar we do not yet understand. Could it be that the sky was once filled not only with wings, but with conversations we have only dimly overheard? And then there are the apes, our closest kin, their gestures and calls so near to speech it unnerves us. Chimpanzees invent local traditions, nut-cracking methods taught to their young, unique courtship rituals, inherited knowledge resistant to chance. Bonobos soothe quarrels with gentleness, shaping societies out of empathy. Gorillas hum and sing while eating, a sound caught between contentment and ritual. These primates stand near the threshold, not ignorant of it, but perhaps simply choosing a different path of being. What separates us may be less of mind than of circumstance. Climate, chance, extinction avoided or embraced. But not all of these near voices still live. Some have vanished completely, leaving questions suspended in fossils. The Neanderthals, once companions to our ancestors, left behind signs of caring for their sick, of burying their dead, of using pigments for adornment. Denisovans, known only from bones and fragments of DNA, whisper through us even now, their genetic traces carried still in human bloodlines. Were they almost us, Or were we almost them? Could their languages and songs once have filled valleys that now stand silent? Entire dialogues may have risen and perished with them. Voices turned to dust while rivers carried onward without pause. Even stranger are the hominins older still. Homo erectus, Homo floresiensis, Homo naledi, each suggesting that thought has arisen, faltered, and rebegun many times. Not a single arc, but a braided river of minds, most now gone. What if consciousness is not rare at all, but abundant, fragile, short-lived, an ember that flares here, flickers there, and vanishes again to silence, leaving only the faintest afterglow? The fossil record hints at other possibilities too. Burrows built with surprising complexity, herding behaviors in creatures long extinct, ecosystems coordinated in ways that seem deliberate. Were these only instinct, or something more? We cannot know, but sometimes in these patterns there emerges a suggestion, a ghost of awareness not fully realized, like an echo caught between stone and silence. Philosophically, this unsettles us. If so many almosts have existed, so many near voices, near minds, then what does it mean that we survived where they did not? Was it luck, timing, coincidence of climate? Were we simply the branch left after pruning, the one consciousness entropy allowed to pass into the present moment? And if that is true, then are we not just another almost in waiting, destined to fade while other voices rise and attempt again? There is humility in this thought. We are not singular, we are part of a wider web of experiments, most erased. Humanity is not a beginning, but a continuation, one of many attempts at memory, many rehearsals of voice. We are inheritors of silence, as much as we are creators of sound. And yet, the traces that remain, songs of whales, murmurs of apes, the intelligence in a bird's eye, remind us that the world may still be alive with other voices, ones we have not yet learned how to hear. What if the earth itself is never without speaking, only without our recognition? Could it be that almost never vanished, but continues around us, quietly, patiently, waiting for us to understand? And if so many near voices surround us still, then what of the deeper, darker places, the hidden underworlds of caves and karst, where silence holds even stranger resonances, and where other echoes might still be waiting? Then what of the deeper, darker places, the hidden underworlds of caves and karst, where silence holds even stranger resonances, and where other echoes might still be waiting? To enter a cave is to step into time slowed almost to stillness. Here, daylight fades until there is none, replaced by a silence so complete it feels physical, surrounding you like water. Every droplet, every distant echo of stone cracking, sounds excessive in its vastness. Caves are the lungs of the planet, breathing slowly, imperceptibly, in cycles of moisture and mineral. Yet they are also its memory vaults, deep archives where whispers of the past linger longer than on the shifting surface above. Stalactites and stalagmites are not ornaments, but clocks. Drop by drop, they carry dissolved minerals from rain that has journeyed through thousands of cracks, each layer recording the composition of the sky it once belonged to. Oxygen isotopes, carbon signatures, traces of ancient air, all are stored in these crystalline scrolls. To cut through a stalagmite is to read centuries of climate, to find the years of drought, the decades of heavy rain, the signals of fires that once swept forests above. Within caves, the ghost of atmosphere lingers, spared from the erasures of wind and sun. Caves are also keepers of bones, from the tiniest bat to ancient extinct mammals. The creatures that wandered into darkness and never returned remain preserved, where weather cannot scatter them. Entire bestiaries are sealed within these halls. Sometimes, deeper within, we uncover remains of our forgotten cousins. Neanderthals, early Homo sapiens, those who took shelter in underground hollows and left behind tools, carvings, pigments. In some chambers the walls bear markings, lines, dots, handprints pressed in ochre, as though these hidden realms served as sanctuaries of memory. or perhaps doorways into other meanings of existence we can no longer interpret. Karst landscapes, shaped by dissolving limestone, extend the mystery further. Sinkholes open without warning, swallowing rivers into the earth. Entire underground waterways flow unseen for centuries, carrying sediments, bones, and artifacts into places inaccessible to the surface. What secrets might lie along these hidden streams? Not absence, but secrecy so complete it masquerades as void. The ground beneath our feet may be hollow, carrying archives we have not yet learned to enter. Speculatively, one wonders how much of human history, or pre-human history, has been sealed away in these underworlds. Archaeology has revealed only fragments, paintings of bison, carved antlers, piles of shells carried inward. Yet for every discovery, countless caves remain unexplored, their entrances washed over, the chambers inaccessible. Entire traditions may have been lived and lost within those stone hearts, erased not through fire or wind, but through concealment in silence too deep for us to breach. The paradox of caves is that they seem so removed, yet they are intensely connected. Surface rains flow downward into them, carrying traces of soil and atmosphere. Earthquakes shape them, glacial melt feeds them, and when collapse occurs, caves shape the surface anew, creating sudden valleys, streams, and absence. They are both hidden and interactive, both memory vault and destroyer. Perhaps this is why humans have always felt drawn to them, not only for shelter, but for ritual. In the hollowness of earth we sense reflection, womb-like, echoing back our faint voices in a way that makes us hear ourselves differently. And yet, caves are also traps of erasure. A fallen roof can bury artifacts forever. A single flood can strip centuries of deposits from its chamber walls. Even limestone, resolute in silence, is not permanent. Drip by drip, flows transform one chamber into another, stalagmites into new forms, old markings blurred until their meaning is lost. What remains is impression, mystery, suggestion, memory reshaped, not by absence, but by incompleteness. To enter a cave is therefore to enter also a philosophy of memory. It teaches us that survival is conditional, what endures is arbitrary. A bone preserved because moisture spared it, another dissolved completely. A handprint lasting 30,000 years, while other marks vanish within decades. The underworld is not a secure archive, but a shifting one, a reminder that even when the earth shelters something, it may protect only fragments, never the whole. And still we return to them, drawn toward the silence, perhaps because caves remind us that forgetting may be the most natural state of all. Outside, rivers and winds scatter memory. Inside, silence simply holds it in suspension, a pause in the erasure, but not its end. And if even caves, with their stillness, preserve only fragments, then what does this mean for memory itself? Not the memory of Earth, but the memory within us. If caves are partial, if stone itself forgets, what chance do we have to remember as living beings, carrying our own stories forward? If stone itself forgets, what chance do we have to remember as living beings, carrying our own stories forward? Forgetting, it seems, is not an accident in the design of existence, but its architecture. Just as mountains are sculpted by erosion, so too is memory shaped by loss. Earth itself teaches us that oblivion is not only inevitable, it is formative. It decides what remains legible, what vanishes, and what is reshaped into silence. Forgetting has a structure, a shape carved into landscapes and into lives alike. Erosion is the most patient hand of forgetting. Cliffs crumble into beaches, grains slide into the sea, whole ranges soften their sharpness until they vanish into plains. No storm announces it, no single moment defines it. Forgetting here is gentle, continuous, nearly invisible. A mountain does not fall in one collapse, but in a billion subtle scatterings of dust. Is that not also how human memory fades? Not in one instant, but in increments so small we don't notice what has already been lost. There are other forms too. Subduction, an entire continent folded under another, descending beneath the crust, into secrecy. It is a forgetting so absolute that it carries landscapes into the mantle, rewriting history in fire until nothing remains. If this is possible for continents, what of our stories? What chapters of humanity have already slipped beneath the tectonic veil, written but unreadable, taken back into the molten dark? And if this is the fate of continents, how fragile are our own fragile imprints in the soil? Entropy also draws the shape of forgetting. It does not just erase, it disperses. DNA unravels, isotopes decay, languages distort until words no longer translate meaning. Entropy reveals that forgetting is not absence, but transformation, the scattering of form into particles, the diffusion of meaning across silence. Maybe nothing is ever completely forgotten. It only changes so thoroughly we can no longer recognize what it was. Philosophically, forgetting is also mercy. To forget is to move forward without carrying unbearable weight. Earth weathers its own past, removing layers of violence, layers of death, allowing new life to take root where old was erased. Had the planet remembered everything, had it stored intact every creature, every fire, every mountain, perhaps nothing new could arise. Forgetting clears the stage. It makes beginnings possible. Still, forgetting unsettles us. Between the lines of preserved history, the vast bulk of what has been is gone. We peer into archives, fossils, isotopes, strata, and realize that we are not seeing history, but the shape of its erasure. The empty spaces, the missing layers, the broken sequences, they tell us that forgetting has form as precise as any fossil. Forgetting leaves scars you can trace in rock just as clearly as footprints. And yet, there are echoes of what forgetting once held. When we walk in landscapes, there is a hush beneath our feet, a sense that the absence itself is presence, the hollow left behind carrying its own truth. Perhaps this is what caves, deserts, oceans, and stones each reveal in their own ways. Each is a geometry of absence, an architecture built upon forgetting. And if forgetting has shape, does memory not then live within the silhouette of what is gone? Even we as individuals carry this. The mind forgets far more than it remembers. Dreams fade seconds after waking. The details of days dissolve into fragments. Faces blur across decades. And yet forgetting is not death. It creates space for imagining, for living without being trapped by detail. Our personal histories echo the greater law of Earth. Only fragments remain, but perhaps the fragments are enough. So when we think of lost civilizations, of extinct species, of possible minds erased beneath glaciers or drowned in oceans, we should not treat forgetting as failure. Forgetting is design. Perhaps thought itself is meant to flare and vanish, to shape what follows through absence more than through presence. Perhaps what appears empty is the truest inheritance, the silence where we feel possibility most strongly. And so we return to the earth with softened eyes, seeing valleys carved not just by rivers, but by the removal of all that once was, seeing mountains smoothed by winds into anonymity, seeing fossils not as complete portraits but outlines of forgetting made visible. The shape of forgetting defines everything we know and everything we do not. And if forgetting itself carries structure, if absence is the most enduring architecture of all, then what does it mean for us, who live as dreams inside the Earth's memory? Could it be that we too are not meant to endure in stone, but to dissolve into the larger cycle, to become part of the long forgetting that carries all life towards silence? Maybe not. But if the shape of forgetting guides every memory, then perhaps what we are truly searching for is not permanence, but the faintest echo that lingers even after forgetting does its work. And if the earth carries dreams, folding them in fire and ice, could it be that it dreams not only of forgetting but also of us? Could it be that it dreams not only of forgetting but also of us? To think of earth as dreaming may seem poetic, even impossible, and yet the metaphors feel inevitable. For what is life, our lives included, if not the planet's long sleep speaking through matter, Minerals fold into forms, breath rises from carbon, oceans become blood, and in time these elements awaken into thought, into memory. Perhaps we are not observers standing apart from Earth, but dream figures within it, made and unmade by the cycles that turn beneath us. Perhaps to live is to rise for a moment in the drift of planetary sleep, only to fade again when it rolls onward. Scientific voices seldom speak of dreams, but patterns in geology resemble them. Mass extinctions arrive like sudden awakenings, erasing whole landscapes of thought and form. Then silence follows, long ages of rebuilding, as if the Earth has turned on its side and drifted into another sleep. Entire climates pulse in rhythms, ice ages and interglacials, as though breath itself carried by atmosphere. Even magnetic fields wander, flipping poles every few 100,000 years, an invisible heartbeat no less real than our own. Are these not the rhythms of a dreaming body, vast beyond our comprehension? And if Earth dreams, then surely it dreams in diversity. Trilobites crawled on ancient seabeds, giant dragonflies hovered in swampy skies, mammoths wandered across frost-bound plains. Each era unrolled with its own iconography, creatures like symbols conjured in the unconscious of a vast mind. Some endured for millions of years, others appeared and vanished in the blink of an epoch. Was this dream experimentation? Countless drafts of existence written and erased, searching for a balance it never intended to finish. In this vision, we are not the first dream the Earth has had. Ours is simply the dream it has now. Others may have come before us, beings who thought, remembered, maybe even wondered. But like fragments from a fading sleep, they have slipped away, leaving only faint traces we struggle to interpret. And perhaps this is why the idea of ancient forgotten civilizations unsettles us so deeply, because it feels like déjà vu, as though we too sense ourselves as dream figures, fragile, flickering, destined to vanish into the same silence. Still, this dream, our moment, is astonishing in its intricacy. We can reflect on the very soil beneath us, measure isotopes to map time, build telescopes, to glimpse the origins of stars. We are dreaming of ourselves dreaming. What other dream does that? Perhaps consciousness itself is the echo of Earth's geological memory, a way for it to fold awareness back upon itself. We measure glaciers, volcanic cores, fossils, and in doing so the Earth awakens to aspects of its own story. Could it be that through us, it remembers what it had long forgotten? Yet dreams are fragile. They can turn, diminish, and dissolve without warning. Our entire history may one day be no more than a thin, dark stripe of carbon in the rock record, indistinguishable from countless past spikes. Our technofossils, plastics, alloys, radioactive isotopes may endure longer than our stories, more legible to future beings than our languages ever were. And in that way, the Earth will continue dreaming, simply in a different scene, with different symbols, carrying forward without sentiment. But what makes the metaphor beautiful is its humility. If we are a dream of the Earth, then we have never stood apart from it. We are not rulers of stone or air or sea. We are threads of the fabric itself. Our thoughts are minerals rearranged. Our breath is atmosphere reborn. Our bodies carry waters older than the moon. We are the Earth dreaming in human form, fragile yet luminous, fleeting but also infinite in connection. In the quiet hours, especially, this vision feels close. To sit at night under the stars is to feel the pull of something larger than time, the same way one feels the edges of a dream that cannot be fully described. The light from stars arrives across millennia, and we fold it into our own stories. Perhaps the Earth weaves these lights into us not by accident, but because in dreaming us, it dreams curiosity too. Memory, wonder, loneliness, all those qualities that make us gaze outward and inward at once. Yet a dream need not last forever. One day we may fade as completely as trilobites or ammonites, and the Earth will dream in new forms. Our absence will not be final. it will simply be folded into silence, making room for whatever symbols emerge next. Perhaps even now, in forests, oceans, or beneath glaciers, the seeds of the Earth's next dream are stirring, waiting for their turn to rise into being. If all of this is true, if we are not an exception but a continuation, then maybe we should not seek immortality in stone or steel, for no dream fixes itself forever. Instead, perhaps our purpose is gentler, to live our part of Earth's imagination with curiosity, with awe, knowing we too will become silence, knowing the dream continues without us. And if the Earth truly dreams through us, then maybe our greatest gift is not what we leave behind, but what we awaken to in this brief moment. The awareness that we are already part of memory, already part of forgetting, already part of a dream, so vast it carries both silence and voice at once. And yet, if Earth itself dreams its living forms, might the echoes of those dreams, our thoughts, our voices, even our artifacts continue after us, rippling outward into a time when even memory itself has ended? Could we become not just a fleeting dream, but an echo beyond the horizon of time? Could we become not just a fleeting dream, but an echo beyond the horizon of time? Time stretches outward in every direction, farther than we can see, farther than we can measure. All that we know, all that we imagine, lies within a span of Earth's time that is itself only a fraction of cosmic time. And still beyond that horizon, beyond even stars dissolving, beyond even galaxies thinning into entropy, there may linger echoes that no silence can ever fully erase. What is an echo but the persistence of sound when the source is gone? Geology gives us echoes too. Shadow lives pressed in fossil form, atmospheric imprints preserved in bubbles of ice, isotopic whispers in coral that no longer lives. Each echo is less than the full body of memory, and yet more than absence. It is presence transfigured. Perhaps, when we speak of civilizations lost or voices beyond our own, what we are sensing is not permanence but echo, the faint lingering of something dissolved, still resonating through matter, through us. The horizon of time feels absolute, but in reality horizons shift. Once the horizon of time for us was a few generations, a lifetime, a remembered ancestor. Then came geology, deep time, isotopes and fossils, pushing our imagination backward into hundreds of millions of years. And even that is still only a beginning. Beyond lies entropy's long twilight, the dissolution of structures, the fading of orbits, the slowing of all heat. That is the far horizon. But could echoes remain even there? Perhaps not bones, not artifacts, but something subtler, strange isotope ratios, lingering technofossils, perhaps even distortions in the chemistry of stone. Memory carried not as record, but as ghost. Speculation reaches further still. Cosmic dust, born of stars, carries elements created inside supernovae billions of years before Earth took shape. That dust flows through our atmosphere today. If matter itself echoes, if its very composition is memory, then are we not already whispers of distant worlds? Our bones carry calcium born in stars we can no longer name. Our blood carries iron spun in explosions older than our sun. Every echo of life on Earth is entangled with echoes beyond Earth. Could our own brief civilizations too become folded into this chain, carried invisibly forward until some distant intelligence, or perhaps no one at all, touches the faint resonance of what we once were? Perhaps echoes are not meant for listeners. An echo exists whether or not anyone hears it. Fossils are pressed into stone regardless of whether eyes will ever see them. Dust circulates whether or not lungs inhale it. Could we too then leave echoes we will never know, radiating outward not as messages but as inevitabilities? Every word spoken, every fire burned, every isotope we scatter will travel on, long after memory gives way to silence. And yet, echoes are fragile. An ammonite pressed into a cliff wall may crumble with one tidal storm. A star's light may fade before reaching any eyes to see it. Even the techno-fossils of our age, our plastics and alloys, may dissolve, ground down into atoms indistinct from any other. Echoes shift and fade, and still some linger longer than we can imagine. Frozen air in Antarctic ice has whispered to us across 800,000 years. Zircon crystals hold isotopic signatures from 4.4 billion years ago, echoes from the very edges of Earth's beginning. If such faint voices can survive, then is it impossible that faint voices of us could remain beyond the horizon of our presence? The most haunting possibility is this, that echoes do not belong to us at all, but to the Earth itself. Our voices, our monuments, our artifacts, they are simply the raw material of future echoes that the Earth will sculpt. Perhaps what is remembered is not what we make, but what the planet decides to fold into stone, glacier, or silt. Every echo is in this way not just a trace of the past, but a collaboration with forgetting. If we are lucky, some part of us will remain as anomaly or curiosity embedded in deep time. If not, then perhaps our echo will be silence itself, reminding us that absence, too, is a kind of resonance. Beyond all of this lies philosophy. Perhaps we misunderstand echoes when we frame them as survival. Perhaps their purpose is not to endure, but to remind us, now, that nothing truly disappears in the moment it exists. Every thought, every life, every civilization vibrates through the web of reality while it lasts. Even after fading, its resonance will have touched others, shaped patterns, altered the course of possibility. That is its echo. That is its permanence. To feel this is to realize that we are not vanishing into nothingness. We are already part of the enduring pattern, not because our forms will survive, but because our effects already ripple outward. So when we speak of echoes beyond the horizon of time, perhaps we are not imagining distant futures, but listening to the present differently, listening to deserts carrying traces of vanished forests, to glassy volcanic flows holding hollows where trees once stood, to caves whispering of rains tens of thousands of years ago. These are echoes already here, reminding us that eternity is not ahead, but all around us. And if one day even our echoes dissolve, if entropy claims every fossil, every techno-fossil, every isotope signature, what then? Perhaps the final echo is silence, vast and full silence. Not because nothing remains, but because everything has dispersed so perfectly that keeping count no longer matters. Silence as the ultimate form of remembering, where every voice of every age is so thoroughly dissolved into being itself that there is no separation at all. And yet, even imagining this horizon, we are left with a question. If silence is the final echo, do we not hear even now its faint beginnings in the wind, in the tide, in the long hush of time that carried all who came before us? Perhaps this listening to silence with wonder, is the truest way of remembering. No fossils required, no records carved, only the awareness that in the great dream of Earth, nothing ever truly leaves. Everything becomes echo. Everything becomes part of that horizon. Everything becomes echo. Everything becomes part of that horizon. It is entropy that composes this elegy, entropy that hums beneath all endings. To listen for it is to hear the low music of the universe, moving not with urgency, but with inevitability. It is the hush woven into every breeze, the quiet sigh in the melting of mountains, the soft murmur when light fades into deeper shadow. Entropy does not shout. It sings gently, continuously, reminding us that all form, all structure, all memory must eventually unravel back into stillness. We imagine entropy as destruction, but perhaps it is more like a universal lullaby, coaxing every shape back into rest. The stars themselves burn down into silence, rivers lose their voices as their currents scatter into seas, mountains sink into plains that know no boundary. Our stories, our thoughts, our civilizations, all are carried too along this current, gentled into absence. Not because we failed, but because this has always been the pattern. Just as a song must fade for silence to be heard, so too must every expression of the universe one day dissolve. Geology reflects this truth with perfect patience. Radioactive isotopes decay in steady rhythm, like the tick of a clock that never errs, leading all matter toward equilibrium. Fossil bones crumble to powder after millions of years, their shapes softening until not even a trace can be held. Oceans breathe in carbon, then release it again into air, dispersing every story too widely to ever recover whole, and deep within rocks, once solid minerals transmute into something simpler, less distinct. In every case, the theme is the same, memory becoming echo, echo becoming silence. Yet there is a mercy in entropy. If nothing could fade, then nothing new could ever emerge. Extinctions erase, but they also allow for new beginnings. Fires consume, but their ash feeds the soil. Even the collapse of stars is not merely an ending, but a gift, scattering elements that one day became oceans, forests, the iron in our blood. Entropy does not hoard, it returns. It does not punish, it balances. What feels like loss from within is from afar the breathing rhythm of transformation. Perhaps the most haunting thought is this: entropy is impartial. It does not distinguish between stone and song, between civilization and leaf, between the greatest monument and the smallest feather. All yield eventually, and in this impartiality lies its strange beauty. Entropy makes no enemies, for it claims all equally. To be forgotten is to share in the fate of galaxies, of planets, of stars themselves. To dissolve is to join all things in a final union of evenness. And yet, perhaps it is not dissolution alone that entropy offers, but curation, as we once wondered. For every memory erased, some fragment always lingers, an isotope here, a fossil there, dust carried across oceans. Even equilibrium carries faint patterns of what came before. Entropy's elegy is not absolute void, but a soft resonance that continues faintly, too faint for most eyes, but echoing nevertheless in silence. Could it be that this gentle persistence is its last gift, that even as it loosens every form, it refuses to let the universe grow truly empty? When we think of our own place in this grand erosion, it may first feel like diminishment. What will be left of us, of our words, of our thoughts? Perhaps not much. Perhaps only a layer of carbon, a sediment of technofossils, a scattering of isotopes marking a brief Anthropocene. Our vast histories might dwindle to a stripe of stone no thicker than a hand, but to drift into entropy's elegy is also to realize we will be remembered in the same way mountains are, and rivers and forests of carbon long turned to coal. Not as individuals, nor as monuments, but as echoes folded into the quiet design of the earth. So let entropy have its elegy, for in its soft unravelling lies a promise that nothing ends in isolation, that every dissolving returns to the fabric from which it came. The hush of entropy is not finality, but merging, not punishment, but peace. And perhaps, when silence deepens beyond even memory, what endures is not what we made, but the faint resonance of having been at all. And if this is true, if entropy's song is what carries us all, it may be that the truest archaeology is silence itself, a silence that asks not what is left, but what has already drifted away, a silence where absence becomes the most enduring archive of all, a silence where absence becomes the most enduring archive of all. To listen for silence is to enter the deepest archaeology, one where the artifacts are not objects but hollows. In the geological record, what is missing often speaks more loudly than what remains. A buried forest tells us life once grew there, but a blank strata with no fossils raises questions even more profound. Was it empty, or was it too full, so overflowing with presence that it erased itself in its own abundance? Silence marks both extremes. Silence is archive, and silence is erasure. When scientists study rock layers, they encounter unconformities, gaps where millions of years have vanished. The stone tells us so directly, something was here but I do not remember it. These gaps are like torn pages from a planetary diary, large absences where only silence remains. Archaeology, too, must contend with silence. Whole cultures vanish, not because they left nothing, but because what they left returned to soil, to water, to dust. The silence does not say nothing happened. It says everything here has been forgotten, that difference unsettles us, as though the earth hides evidence purposefully. And yet silence is not absolute void. It is structure in a desert valley devoid of bones. The silence is evidence of wind too strong for preservation. In a cave without markings, the silence itself implies no one ventured there, or else they did, and their pigments dissolved. Silence becomes diagnostic. What is not seen tells as much, sometimes more than what is. Perhaps silence is the truest archaeology, because it makes us imagine actively, filling the void not with certainty, but possibility. Think of language. A pause can hold more than the word "it interrupts." Silence gives shape to sound. In the same way, silence in geology, silence in archaeology gives context to the fragments that survive. The remains of one person, one tool, one fossil. The surrounding silence makes them monumental, like a star burning in the vastness of night. Without silence, fragments alone would mean little, but within silence they become radiant. Could it be that the earth is shaped as much by the intentionality of silence as by the presence of relics? Perhaps silence is how entropy sculpts meaning, choosing what not to give us so that we are invited into wonder. We are meant not to know completely. The invitation to mystery itself becomes the inheritance. In this way, archaeology is not only about objects and layers, but about listening to silence with the same discipline we give to stone and bone. There is also the silence of sound itself. Wind over an ancient landscape, waves over a drowned plain, no voices, no witnesses. And yet, in listening, we sense companionship, an odd recognition that silence is not emptiness, but continuation. The echoes of all who came before persist here not as voices we can discern, but as a presence we cannot name. It is possible that what remains beyond the horizon of history is not objects, but this feeling itself, the emotional resonance of being one life among countless vanished others. In this way, silence carries humility. It gives us no certainty, only awe. Silence cannot be commodified, and it cannot be falsified. It simply is. The longer we listen, the more we feel it is complete in itself, an archive of erasure that still holds. To observe silence in Earth's record is to acknowledge that forgetting, like remembering, has texture, a shape that we can trace if not translate. So archaeology is not just bones or ruins, it is absence, structured and repeated in layers we study without fully grasping. It is the pause between echoes, the knowledge that vast chapters are gone, yet their shape remains in the gaps themselves. Silence is not the loss of meaning. Silence is meaning written negatively, like light defined by shade. And if silence itself is the final archaeologist, then perhaps the stories we long to hear are already around us, not in what we find, but in what remains hidden. Not in the fossil, but in the thousands that did not fossilize. Not in the remnants of civilization, but in the countless whose voices dissolved to nothing. Silence carries them all equally. Silence holds more than archives ever could. Silence, perhaps, is the most complete record of all. And if silence truly archives more deeply than memory, then what happens when silence itself is carried forward, when forgotten futures look back, not at fragments, but at us, wondering why our record is faint, why their inheritance is mostly absence? Imagining how we will one day be archived as silence ourselves leads us into a strange mirror, for we who search so carefully for the traces of those who came before are becoming the very fossils, the very isotopes, the very absences of tomorrow. All that feels urgent now, cities glowing on coastlines, satellites circling overhead, words spoken under quiet rooms of light, will one day become sediment or nothing at all. Earth's deep patience will fold over us, as it has folded over every age, transforming our presence into faint echoes. Perhaps to the future, this moment we call history will stand not as a climax, but as one of the many forgotten intervals within the planet's longer sleep. Our skyscrapers, sharpened against the sky, will in time collapse. Steel rusts, concrete fractures, glass returns to silica, and then to sand. Highways will buckle under root and rain. The seas will rise and redraw the boundaries we once thought permanent. All the monuments of our story, no matter how monumental they seem, are made not of eternity but of entropy. What cannot crumble will still dissolve into background, indistinguishable from the geology around it. A future geologist may find a thin stratum spiked with carbon ash and trace metals, a peculiar stripe we seeded unknowingly into Earth's record. That band may be all that remains of our billions of lives. We call this imagined layer the Anthropocene, the age of humans written into stone, plastics hardened into technofossils, radioactive isotopes locking our brief violence into measurable decay. Yet even these so-called indelible marks will fade. Plastics soften, polymers unravel, uranium breaks toward lead. The archive cannot hold everything, not forever. And so what we imagine as permanent scars may themselves become silence. The Earth's inclination is always toward erasure, always toward folding the extraordinary back into the ordinary. From this angle, our present feels different. We live not as climax, but as transition. We are not permanent authors, but brief scribes, writing only for the page that tomorrow turns. Perhaps the truest humility is to see ourselves not as the masters of Earth's memory, but as contributors to its forgetting. Our stories will not be preserved whole. They will be erased, distorted, folded into the silence that succeeds us. What will linger are anomalies, a cracked shard, a faint isotope ratio, a scatter of alloys mistaken for natural seams. That is how our future will remember us, if it remembers at all. And yet, there is a strange comfort in this thought, for so too did every forest, every reef, every vanished civilization before us dissolve into silence. We are not singled out. We are united. To be forgotten is to return to the same deep rhythm that carried mammoths, trilobites, rainforests, and coral cities into memory's dusk. We belong not to permanence, but to impermanence. Perhaps the dignity of being alive is to embrace our role as a fleeting dream within the planet's larger vision. Still, we wonder who will read the traces. If another species rises millions of years after us, minds shaped differently, perceptions attuned to other frequencies, will they find our layer? Will they measure our carbon, our strange radioactive tick marks, and ask who were these beings? Were they careful? Were they careless? Will they wonder if we too asked about others before us, as we are doing now, and will they know that most of what we were has already been lost? Perhaps they will see us only through silence, filling it with speculation just as we fill the silences of the past. In another possibility, no one may come. Our traces may be folded into stone, unread forever, archives without readers. Does that diminish them, or does it make them truer? For memory does not require an audience. Every fossil, every isotope, every nail encased in silt is already a testimony, whether or not it is ever found. Silence itself is the witness. If we dissolve into oblivion with no one to unearth us, still the earth will have carried us briefly within its dream. To imagine Earth's future as a forgotten past is to look at our present with gentleness. All fear of disappearance softens when we realize disappearance is not failure, but continuity. We are part of the same forgetting that sculpted oceans from mountains, coal from forests, silence from civilizations. Our role is not to resist erasure, but to shimmer brightly within it, to add our echo before it fades. And perhaps, within silence something does endure, not our monuments, nor our satellites, but the questions themselves, the wondering, the asking. Those are the gifts passed forward. Each age has carried them, whether in handprint on cave wall, in monolith aligned to stars, or in isotopes stored in coral. Perhaps one day, staring into silence, a future mind will feel that same trembling curiosity, the same uncertain awe, and know that across the abyss of forgetting, they are not alone. And yet, if our own story will become silence, then maybe silence itself is the greatest gift we leave. A wide, resonant space, open enough to hold the questions others will ask, open enough to hold echoes beyond the horizon of time. Silence itself is the greatest gift we leave, for within silence lives the question, and questions more than answers are what carry memory forward. Answers settle, they close. Questions linger, they unfold and expand, echoing long after voices fade. Perhaps this is why the earth seems to speak to us in questions rather than in certainties, why its archives are partial, fragmentary, ambiguous. It is as though the entire planet is offering riddles across time, inviting each generation to listen, to wonder, to ask again. Look closely at a fossil, and you will not only ask what creature it was, but what world surrounded it, what forests, what waters, what vanished lives. Peer into the carbon spike within a distant stratum, and you ask, was this the breath of fire or something more? Stand within a stone circle, and you cannot help but wonder whose hands placed these and why. Every fragment is both evidence and invitation, and the invitation is the true gift. Not because we will decipher it completely, but because wonder itself awakens us. The unanswered question has been humanity's oldest companion. Long before the first scientific measurements, long before the first myths, there was the raw and unyielding sense of mystery. Stars overhead, oceans without edges, caves running deeper than light. The questions outran us then, and they outrun us still. What came before us? What follows after? Are we unique, or are we echoes of others who rose and fell before silence claimed them? Each question opens a door we can never close, for even when unanswerable, it deepens our perception of being alive. In geology, the unanswered question is everywhere. Gaps in strata, fossils of creatures with no known ancestors, catastrophic boundaries with uncertain causes. Science fills these spaces with hypotheses, maps, equations, but the gaps always remain. And strangely, it is the gaps we remember most vividly, the mysteries that resist resolution. Perhaps the earth is not a complete chronicle, but a deliberately incomplete one, shaping us into questioners, teaching us that certainty is rare, but curiosity is constant. Philosophically, there may be wisdom in this incompleteness. If everything were explained, if nothing remained hidden, what story would be left to tell? Without unanswered questions, memory would flatten, losing dimension. It is doubt, mystery, absence that give our lives texture, that make knowledge a living river instead of a stagnant pool. Entropy may erase, silence may veil, but both ensure that there are always new discoveries, new questions rising from what once seemed empty. Even extinction carries this gift. Every species vanished beyond our sight compels us to wonder how it lived, how it moved, what sounds it made, what chances it never had. The Neanderthals remind us not only of a lost humanity, but of the question what paths might history have taken if they still stood beside us. Fossils remind us not of answers, but of possibilities. Dust blown across oceans whispers questions we cannot pass, and yet still we breathe them in, merging curiosity with every breath. And so, as we close this long meditation, we realize what Earth has given us is not clarity, but invitation. Its library of stone is not a finished record, but a book missing most of its pages. Its fossils are not full portraits, but broken echoes. Its silences are doorways left ajar. This may frustrate us, but it also keeps us awake. It is the unanswered that keeps us searching, imagining, dreaming, and perhaps dreaming itself is the point. What if our role has never been to solve every riddle, but to keep listening? What if our contribution to Earth's memory is not permanence but wonder? To look at silence and still feel awe, to notice a gap and still sense meaning, to inherit absence and turn it into imagination. Perhaps this is the true continuity between us and all who came before, curiosity itself, endlessly renewed, the only echo that never disappears. So when we think of our own vanishing someday, when we imagine our cities sinking into the soil and our monuments ground down into sand, let us not despair, for even in silence, we leave behind the questions. Someone or something, or perhaps no one at all, will peer at the faint stripe of our time and ask again, who were they? What did they wonder? Did they know how brief, how luminous their hour was? And in the asking, we will be remembered, not as complete answers, but as questions that stretch across time like stars across night. And so the earth offers us its quiet gift, unanswered questions, infinite and eternal. They do not close the story, they keep it alive. They ripple into tomorrow, binding us to future dreamers, reminding us that even in silence, there is always something to ask, something to wonder, something to imagine. And maybe that is enough. Maybe the truest form of memory is not what endures in stone, but what endures in wonder,